Do you feel lost, like you've wandered into a dense, shadowed wood, unsure of the path forward? Do distractions pull you from the still, small voice, leaving your soul restless and searching? Have you felt the weight of silence and wondered if God has left you alone? Here on the Distracted Christian Podcast, we walk that dark night together. Every step draws us closer to the one who's been waiting. His love is the light that guides, His grace, the compass that never fails. Gray skies pressed low over the caravan, a ceiling of dull iron. The wanderer walked with them in silence, his staff tapping in slow rhythm. Dust clung to his boots, gathered in his cloak, and covered him like a second skin. The familiar consolations of the road, the bird songs, the wind patterns, rustling leaves were gone. In their place lingered a gnawing hunger, a yearning for a love he could not name. Among the travelers was a boy named Liron, wiry, all elbows and a sharp grin. And he had a pack that was too big for him to carry and a swagger too big for his frame. The boy had the knack of putting you at ease with that smile and making you laugh at his foolishness. One morning, the wanderer reached out and yanked that strap straight before it sought another groove in that boy's shoulders. You keep carrying it like that, you'll wear a hole clean through your collarbone. Liron shot him a sideways smirk. I've been hauling sacks of grain since I was 12. This is nothing. Well, grain don't cut off your arm and then leave you for dead, replied the wanderer. Yeah, but the rats at the mill might, he retorted with a laugh. That night, firelight flickered over their faces, and they shared a strip of dried fruit. Liron chewed loudly, then burst into his tune from the village, quick and rolling, the song sort of sung to keep work moving. His voice cracked on the high notes, but he didn't seem to care. You know it? He asked, still chewing. I have heard it, said the wanderer. Never with that much enthusiasm. We used to sing it on our way to the fields. We'd sing it with the bells. The temple bells used to ring before sunrise. You could feel them in your chest, Liron said. Now they're busted. It sounded like a drunk coughing on a barrel. My father says miracles are a racket anyways. He hasn't been back in years. That bitterness clung in the air. The wanderer sat for a moment, staring into the flames. Once I was the one who rang the bells, said. Liron blinked. You? What were you, a monk or something? A little more than that, the wanderer said, eyes fixed on the fire. I was called Starborn. People came from hundreds of leagues to see me light fires that would not die. I thought the flame would burn in me forever. He gave a dry, almost amused breath. Now I walk and listen, and sometimes I'm not sure I remember any of the sounds at all. Liron studied him as if trying to match the man beside him to the legend he just described. The wanderer shifted abruptly, as though closing a door in his mind. Anyways, he said, once in the coastal marshes, I nearly froze in a storm. I found the rib cage of a whale, long dead, half buried in this salt and mud. The wind cut through me like knives, and the marsh grass snapped against the dark. I crawled inside, wedged myself underneath the curve of its bones, and wrapped my cloak tight. The smell, well, you don't forget something that's been rotting in brine for a decade. But the ribs broke the wind, and the mud held a little warmth. I could hear the tide coming in, like the carcass was still alive and dreaming. And by morning, the frost had crusted the bones, but I was still breathing. Liron wrinkled his nose. That's disgusting. Well, it kept me alive, the wanderer said, offering the last strip of fruit. Better than ending the story with a, and then I froze to death. Liron laughed. Sharp and quick, his eyes slid over his shoulder, as if checking whether or not someone else was listening. One evening, by the campfire, Liron fingered a worn channel of fire tome. Do you think the flame still speaks? His hands trembled slightly. They say the silence is just another voice if we learn to hear it. The wanderer studied him, a shadow of pity and recognition in his gaze. He himself did not hear wisdom in the silence, only just the absence. The will within him stared at it, at it, at it. Will within him strained, caught between a love that burned fiercer in longing and the emptiness where a lesser voice loves had vanished. It was the strait of his soul, pressed tight between what had gone and what was not yet given. And then a scream broke without warning. Figures surged from the dark, cloaks marked with a crimson brand, a flame bound in the chain links, each link catching the torchlight like a glint of bloody teeth. The caravan scattered. The wanderer stepped forward, his hands outstretched to shield Liron when ropes bit into his wrists. He turned, and he saw the boy, tear streaked face, standing there beside a burly soldier. I'm sorry, Liron choked. They told me to find you to be sure. The one the Ash King seeks. I didn't want to believe, but what if you're the reason the fire had gone out? Those old words cut him deep to his soul. Hadn't he asked himself the same? Hadn't the silenced already accused him? They dragged him to some ruins through the fading light, into a makeshift guard tower without warmth, down into a rubble strewn corridor in a small cell. It was really a hole. The cell was low and windowless, its stones damp with breath of unseen things. They stripped him of his cloak, staff, and his dignity, all alike. His wrists ache where the chains bit into them. He ate little, slept less. The silence here was no longer empty. It pulsed. At times he imagined it like it was breathing. At other times it was laughing at him. And each day, or what he thought might be day, brought interrogation. Where's the flame? How did you channel it? Has the flame left you, or have you left it? He said nothing. He had nothing left to give. They listed the Ash King's miracles. A fire called down upon the salt waste, rains that fell where no clouds have wandered in years, a girl even raised from death. He brings back what you have lost, they whispered, the words slithering through the cell like incense. He restores while you diminish. What if they were right? He thought of those days he had burned with joy, with presence, with certainty, of the crowds of the that wept and the temples that sang, of a love so vast it felt like it poured out on him, and now nothing. Just a gnawing where the flame had once been. Love still burned in him, but it burned without balm, a fire with no end. He pressed his forehead to the floor, trying to bury the ache in the cold stone. And then, one day, the door opened, and the Ash King himself stepped inside, robed in burning threads that flickered in the torchlight. His face was angular, inhumanly calm, his eyes bright with strange confidence. In his hand, he held an ember stone, pulsing red, warm enough that the air itself shimmered. He knelt beside the prisoner and held it aloft. This is it, he said. A fragment of the flame. Yours, perhaps. Take it. Feel it again. If you serve me, the silence will end. The wanderer looked at the stone. He felt it across his skin before he touched it. Heat, the promise of life. And his hands began to lift. And then shame. His arms dropped, his face turned away. No, he whispered, voice brittle. The Ash King did not answer him. He stood back for a minute, looked at him. Well, you're nothing. And then he reached forward and pressed the ember stone into the watcher's chest. Fire seared through him. The scent of burning flesh filled the cell. He screamed a guttural cry, raw and wordless, echoing off the stone. When it ended, the Ash King rose. Then rot, if you will not serve me, he said, and walked out. Alone again, the wanderer collapsed, shaking, grasping. Somewhere beneath that pain, a prayer foolishly still stirred. Do what you will, he thought, and if I am damned, I am yours. And he lay still, there with no reply. And yet, he felt as if he has passed through the edge of despair, and as something stranger, a calm that was not comfort, a silence that was not absence. His will, broken and hollow, stopped grasping. He was no longer seeking the light, but he had found a place beyond the dark. Well, welcome back, friends. And here's what we're going to do in today's episode. We're going to work our way through The Dark Night of the Soul, Book 2, Chapters 7 and 8. As, of course, it's written by St. John of the Cross. And St. John in this chapter is talking about the moment when the soul has loved long enough and deep enough that God starts to clean not just what we do, but what we want. He lets the will burn. He lets love ache. He lets us feel for a time like even the silence is mocking us. Chapter 7 is St. John basically saying, yeah, your agony has a name. It's the will longing for God with no relief. Love wants God, but cannot enjoy God. Chapter 8 is him saying, God may even allow the worst thoughts in you. Thoughts like, am I rejected? Am I lost? Now, these God allowing this is not to crush you, but to empty you so fully that only He can fill you. So let's open St. John of the Cross and walk from the stone cell into his words for it. He calls it the pinnacle of distress and other afflictions. And we'll see why God would uh, ever love us enough to lead us through the night like this. So, now these chapters are different than the early dryness or the missing of the comforts earlier on. Yes, it feels like torture going through those as well, but those are behind us. This is what happens when love has gone so far out that God presses on the place where we love him, choose and desire him. He presses on the will until it is clean enough to love him like he loves it. Love works like a fire. Picture the soul as he describes it. It's not faithless, it's not sliding into sin. It is a soul that has prayed, served, and burned with love. That is why the loss now feels like a tear. St. John says the will is straitened, which means it's squeezed tight. On one side, it is the memory of past closeness with God. On the other side, it is the present emptiness where nothing answers. The soul cannot go back because God has shut the door. And it cannot step into the fullness it longs for because God has not quite opened that door either. So it just loves in pain. Sometimes, St. John says, the soul is hit by a sudden memory of what it had lost, like a dart. You're living a life and a thought strikes you. I used to know God. What happened? Then another thought, of course, follows. Will I ever get it back? That's what makes this stage so hard. It's not only pain, it's pain plus not knowing when it will end. That is why he calls it the pinnacle of distress. To show us the weight of it, St. John pulls in the Bible's loudest voices of grief. He brings in Job, he brings in Jeremiah, not because they are dramatic, but because plain speech cannot carry this kind of sorrow alone. Their words sound like being trapped, like being walled in, like prayer rising up and just hitting stone. Why does it hurt so much? because the will is the part of you that says yes. Your mind can be confused and still keep going. Your memory can feel empty and still do the next right thing, but the will wants to cling to God and love. And here it reaches out and finds no sweetness, no progress, no clear sign. Even when a wise person speaks to you and gives you true counsel, you might not be able to take it in. The pain can make comfort feel like sand in your mouth. So loneliness piles on top of dryness. And St. John says something here that can sound sharp, but it's meant to steady you. Until God has cleaned the soul in a way he chooses, there is no quick remedy. That means you are not failing because you cannot fix it. You're not missing the right trick or the right retreat, the right playlist. The work is mostly passive. God is the one acting. And your job is endurance, not cleverness. And God is not cruel. St. John says the pressure comes in waves. Sometimes the darkness eases. You get a day or a week when you can breathe again. You feel a little peace and think it's over. Then the fire returns. And not because God is fickle, but because deep roots do not come out all at once. Each wave goes a little deeper. Each brief lift is also a message: you are not abandoned, but I am working. This is why St. John compares it to the Catholic doctrine of purgatory. The deepest pain is not in people who don't care. The deepest pain in purgatory is in people who love. The more the soul loves God, the more it aches when it cannot taste him. And that was chapter 7. Chapter 8 turns to focus. St. John says another fear shows up here. The soul cannot even pray the way it used to. It tries to focus, but it finds fog. It reads holy words, and they slide right off. For someone who has lived by prayer, this can feel like punishment. But St. John slips in a key. This is not the time for the soul to do a lot of talking to God. This is the time for God to do the deep work in the soul. God moves you from active prayer to passive receiving. Before, you could reason, picture, feel, you could push your mind along. Now, God is cleansing you at a level you cannot manage. And when God is doing that, you don't get to control it. You bow low and you let Him work. St. John also describes this strange forgetfulness that comes with this stage. You can't hold on to a good thought. You get distracted, even in prayer, and it can feel humiliating. But he says it is not laziness. It can happen because a strong interior work is absorbing your lower powers. He uses a surprising image in this chapter. The purer the light, the more it feels like darkness, as we have seen many times. God's light is so simple, so bright, and so unlike our normal thinking that it first blinds us, yet it also sharpens our sight. When a real fault shows up, the soul can suddenly see it with new clarity. That is a sign the light is there, even when the room feels dark. All of this aims at one thing: making the soul poor enough to receive God fully. As long as you can lean on your own strength, your own skill in prayer, your own sense of progress, you would quietly lean on that. So God, in his severe mercy, strips away the props, even the feeling of I'm doing well. Then, in that powerlessness, union is prepared. It is a hard gospel, but it is still the good news. And St. John is not describing failure. He's describing the last stretch before the dawn. When you are sure God has only shut you out, when your own heart seems to testify against you, when love hurts more than sin ever did, that can be a sign that God is nearer than your senses can detect. The soul is being reduced so it can finally receive everything. So we've walked with St. John into that low, breathless place where the soul can't do much except for endure and let God work. And now let's move over to Jeremiah. Because Jeremiah is the prophet of the soul that still loves God even when God feels like a wall. Jeremiah, you could say, is the prophet of the wounded will. He's the weeping prophet. He loves God. He is called by God. He speaks for God, and yet his life feels like a contradiction. In Jeremiah 20, he says, "You have deceived me, Lord, and I was deceived." That is not a rebellion, like in some cheap way. That is a faithful man telling God the truth about what obedience has cost him. He had said yes to God, and that yes had brought him shame, loneliness, and the fire in his bones. And that's basically the chapter 7 of The Dark Knight. St. John says the soul is squeezed. It wants God, but it cannot enjoy him. It remembers sweetness, but now it tastes like bitterness. Jeremiah knows that place. He says God's word is like a burning fire shut up in my bones. He tries to hold it in, but he cannot. Love has become a pain. Calling has become a pressure. The will cannot escape God, but it also cannot feel comfort in God. That is the terrible dignity of this night. The soul is not cold, it is burning. Then Jeremiah gives us the other half in Lamentations chapter 3. The prophet says, "He has walled me about so that I cannot escape." And he says, "Though I call and cry for help, he shuts out my prayer." That's almost too honest for polite religion. Prayer rises and it feels blocked. Hope reaches and it hits a wall. The person praying does not say, "I forget God." He says, "God has hidden himself." And that's basically chapter 8 of The Dark Night of the Soul, book 2. St. John says God may allow the soul to be assaulted by these fearful thoughts like, "Am I lost? Am I rejected? Has God turned on me?" Jeremiah gives language to that terror. "My soul is bereft of peace. I have forgotten what happiness is." Now, that's not atheism. That is the suffering of someone who knows what peace was and now cannot find it. But Jeremiah does not stop there. After all this darkness, he says, "But this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases." Notice how small this turn is. He does not suddenly feel better. The walls do not instantly fall, but in the dark, his memory becomes an altar. He remembers God's mercy when he cannot feel God's mercy. And that's the path through these chapters. The soul does not conquer the night by manufacturing light, it endures by refusing to lie. Jeremiah teaches us how to pray when prayer feels impossible. Tell God the wall is there. Tell him the fire hurts. Tell him that you feel forgotten. And then, with trembling hands, place one sentence of hope upon the altar. "The Lord is my portion," says my soul. "Therefore will I hope in him." So, how can you apply this to your life? What are things that you can do? How can you take action? Well, first, stop treating spiritual dryness as an automatic failure. When prayer feels empty, the first instinct is often, "I must be doing something wrong." But both Jeremiah and St. John both give us another possibility. God may be doing a deeper work than your emotions can measure. So, really, what you should do is simple. It is hard, but it is simple. Don't panic. Don't panic just because you cannot feel what you used to feel. Stay faithful in the small feelings. Pray the plain prayer. Show up. Keep your eyes on the altar, even when it brings no sweetness. Second, tell God the truth without editing yourself. Jeremiah does not sanitize his prayers. He tells God when he feels trapped, exhausted, mocked, and forgotten. That is not faithlessness, that is intimacy. So this week, give yourself permission to pray. Not dramatic, but honest. Say, Lord, I feel walled in. Say, I miss the way you used to make me feel, you used to help me feel. Say, I don't know how to hope right now. God is not threatened by truthful grief. In fact, truthful grief may be the doorway back to trust. Third, hold one sentence of hope when you cannot hold the whole story. In Lamentations, the turn does not come because Jeremiah suddenly understands everything. It comes because he remembers one thing, that is, the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. That may be all that you can carry some days, and that is enough. Choose one line of scripture, one true sentence, one anchor. The Lord is my portion, or his mercy is are new every morning, or I am not abandoned. And repeat it to yourself. This is your act of resistance against despair. The night may still be dark, but the soul can learn to wait for the dawn. Well, that's where we're ended for today. Thank you for spending this time on Distracted Christian, creation of the Fresh Ground Theology podcast. I know you have filled this hour with me, and you could have filled it with anybody or anything. So the fact that you chose to sit with St. John of the Cross and this strange, beautiful idea about how God is loving you through your dryness really means a lot to me. Huge thanks to Anton Koryakov for the theme music. He is the one making this sound way calmer and wiser than I actually am. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, or wherever, please make sure to subscribe and so you don't miss the next episode. And if you want to help us out a little bit, leave a rating or share it with somebody who's wondering why God feels quiet right now. For show notes, more reflections, and other theological rabbit holes, head over to freshgroundtheology.com where I park the extras. I'm Nate Labradorf. Thanks for listening. Stay faithful in the quiet, and I'll see you next time. Special thanks to Anton Koryakov for today's theme music on the show. Tune in to hear more next time. Thanks for listening.